So our next sponsor spotlight is Dan Fierson, the Director of Parking Solutions for McCain. Dan? Here you go. Okay.
Do you have a chance to tie this in?
Sure.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, I'm Dan Fierson. I'm the Director of Parking Solutions with McCain. And I'll keep this really short. If you do need to use the restroom, I'd hold that until the next vendor comes up. And, so one thing about McCain, which you might not realize, our core business is traffic and transportation. So we make things like traffic signals, the controllers that control the actual signals. We do those cabinets you see on the intersections. We have 6 million traffic signals across the U.S. that McCain has manufactured. And we make those amber alert signs that you see up and down I-5. So it's very easy for us to manufacture things like the signs, the sensors. We have our own engineering department. We like to work with entities and hear what are the problems you have and coordinate solutions tailored to those. I'll be real brief here. Our systems are all scalable. We could start with approach signs, so you could have multiple parking structures that you could give guidance to. If one's full, you can direct people to the nearest facility with available parking. Then you go up to the entrance signs at the parking structure. Here you want to indicate what's available on every level. And then once you're inside, you can have signs on every level at key decision points for the motorists. Again, you want to direct them to the nearest available spot in the shortest possible time. And all aisles can have their own individual signs as well. And then you go down to the base sensors. Base sensors is single space monitoring. We do that with an ultrasonic sensor tied to LEDs for indication. Our LEDs are color programmable. And we also do what's called zone monitoring. And to get into all the different solutions we provide, I just urge you to come by and speak with me at the out here. And that's it, right there.
And that's Craig Wilson, the Head of Marketing and Public Relations for IP Sense. Greg, are you in here? Okay, come on down. So, I think we've identified maybe our next regional workshop. I felt like we didn't even scratch the surface on truck parking. We were just starting to get interesting. So, Craig?
Form, actually. I'm sorry, we're late registered, and so it was so fast we didn't bring any slides, so you're going to have to do with my 2.5 minutes of potential wisdom. Company name is IP Sense. We're a Kalamazoo-based operation. My partner and I have about 25 years worth of experience in parking. I was the Director of Business Development for Duncan Industries back in 92 to 2001, where we actually did the actual on-street parking integration and imagine revenue reconciliation, which was before is there a space, was is there any money, and is it going in the right place? In most cases it wasn't. So that enabled a whole plethora of privatization initiatives in parking and a lot of the integration stuff that came about since then. The latest thing, of course, is road sensing availability. We integrate a Dutch product made by NEDAP in the eastern part of Holland. It's been in development in Europe for 6 years. We're just introducing it in the U.S. now. We're in 2 pilots. We're in a pilot in New York City, in the Bronx, and we just completed the one with a Florida DOT for truck parking. So we've spent the last couple of 3 years learning, studying, and we're now introducing the product. And our vision is sort of very focused on the head-end application as a depository for data that can be served out to anybody that the owners may want to take it to. So very non-proprietary, very open, IP-based, relational database type of stuff. So that's pretty much the long and the short. We're very pleased to be here. It's our first ITS convention. It's been interesting so far.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next panel, which is going to focus on LA ExpressPark. They'll focus on the demand-based pricing in the Los Angeles downtown areas, the preliminary results, and the lessons learned. This session will also compare implementation approaches between LA and San Francisco and their outcomes. The session is moderated by Amir Sedadi, the Vice President of Intelligent Transportation Systems within the IPS group. Amir?
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you took a quick break. We're the last presentation before the reception, so I know I've got your full attention, and my job is to get everybody out of here at 5:30. It is a great honor to be here with this great panel. For many years, for at least 6 months ago, I used to be on the other side doing a lot of presentations across the country on ExpressPark, as I used to be the Assistant General Manager for City of Los Angeles, and I also managed Pasadena's parking program, where I met Dr. Shoup many years ago and learned a lot from him and his theories. And I'm happy to say that ExpressPark was one of the things that I was able to, with the help of my staff here at that time, Dan, to really implement. So we heard about Go Berkeley. We've heard from Dr. Shoup. We talked about smart parking. Now it's really time to look at the on-street program and how that whole theory and that concept has now put in place, and we have a great panel that we're going to talk to you about. Leading off is Dan Mitchell. He's a senior transportation engineer for the City of LA Department of Transportation, where he's currently responsible for the parking technology and the parking meter operations citywide, with over 36,000, almost 37, 38,000 now. So it's going on. It's keep going. Dan has led the technological overhaul of the programs, city's 38,000 meter parking spaces, growing the revenues from 21 million to 51 million in annual revenue. And prior to this assignment, which I think is really key to this whole technology component, Dan used to manage the department's traffic signal program. For many of you, the name is ADSAC. That's the acronym for the Automated Traffic Surveillance and Control System. And Dan was able to bring a lot of that technology in the traffic transportation into his parking background. Dan also is currently managing the implementation of the LA ExpressPark, which is an $18.5 million federally funded program to reduce traffic congestion and pollution, and Dan's going to tell you all about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amir. It's very exciting to be here with you this afternoon. I'm glad to get this opportunity to share with you about what we've been doing in Los Angeles. I know we've heard a lot about San Francisco and the great project that they have here in the Bay Area. They've been pioneers in putting Dr. Shoup's principles into practice, and I'm very excited that I'm able to share with you what we've been doing in Los Angeles. It's really a grand experiment, and I'm very appreciative to the City of San Francisco for helping us as pioneers in this project, helping us get off the ground and sharing what they learned, so that we could be as successful as we have been in this short time. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Now we've got the presentation going. I'll try to move quickly through the beginning part of this, sharing the details of the scope of the project and so forth, and get into kind of our experience and try to highlight the differences. I know many of you are familiar with SF Park and the great work that they've done there. I'll try to highlight some of the differences that we've seen in Los Angeles. Most of those differences fall into two different categories. One, that it's a very different city. It's a very different built environment in downtown LA as opposed to San Francisco. And the other is the shorter time frame that we've been under, that it's just a one-year demonstration project. Okay, so LA ExpressPark is an innovative approach to curb traffic congestion and pollution in downtown LA using the demand-based parking pricing scheme we're familiar with and real-time parking guidance. The project was launched in May of last year as a one-year demonstration project running from June all the way through May of 2013. There's $15 million in federal funding and a $3.5 million local match. Our goals were to increase availability of on-street parking. And I know that that Dr. Shoup talks about this 85% occupancy. Different cities have taken different percentages to try to apply that to the real-world built environment. In LA ExpressPark, our goal was 10 to 30% availability, or the reverse of that would be 70 to 90% occupancy on each block that's convenient to pay. And then reduce traffic congestion and pollution as a result of drivers not circling around the block. That provides improved traffic flow for transit as well as private vehicles. And then the parking guidance system that helps folks to find those available spaces both on and off street. And ultimately, the hope is to encourage a shift in travel choices that will encourage more folks to use other modes of travel. This is the project area. It's essentially all of downtown Los Angeles. For those of you that are familiar with it, it's bounded by the Harbor Freeway on the west, Alameda on the right, and Adams on the south, just south of the 10 Santa Monica Freeway. It's a total of, with both on and off street, it's a total of 14,000 spaces approximately, about 6,300 on street, and then almost 8,000 off street spaces in 9 city-owned facilities. So one of the differences in Los Angeles is most of the off-street parking in downtown LA is privately operated. So, and that's just the nature of the beast there in LA. So we included all of the publicly owned off-street parking, and a big chunk of that is in our convention center LA Live area that is really influenced by event-based traffic. But we included everything that applied in the project area, but we have much less control over the off-street than we do in the on-street. Now, the other difference is that LA ExpressPark sits as one component of a larger project, a strategic project to help manage traffic congestion coming into downtown Los Angeles. And that's almost a $300 million project. It involves the conversion of carpool lanes on the 10 and the 110 freeways coming into downtown into hot lanes or express lanes, has transit improvements and station improvements, new van pools, and then at the destination of both of these routes, the LA ExpressPark program. It includes new meter technology, the sensors, occupancy systems for the off-street lots, real-time guidance system. A central integrated parking management system is an important component I'll briefly mention, and then our public outreach that's been essential. So many of you may be familiar with this technology, but we upgraded all of our metered parking throughout downtown LA through new single-space and multi-space meters. We had existing pay stations there, and ultimately decided after a full analysis to upgrade the pay stations that were already there because they could be compatible with the requirements of the program. That was the most cost-effective way of moving forward. All of the technology accepts coins, credit cards, and mobile phone payments with real-time communication, and these meters are capable of charging the demand-based rates that were required for the program, including time of day and those based on the current occupancy. We have implemented a pay-by-phone system downtown using Park Mobile that is integrated in kind of a unique way in LA. It was really important that we wanted a seamless integration so that the payments when you pay on your phone actually appear right on the meter. We wanted to make sure that for the enforcement officers there wasn't any confusion or any challenges with them having to check another device and potentially issue people citations. So that's another kind of an overlay feature across the board. On-street vehicle sensors, and we'll hear more about this from Zia Yusuf, who's going to be talking from Streetline. But there are wireless sensors in each of the on-street parking spaces embedded in the street. And then when those are integrated with the meter data, that provides other opportunities to optimize the rates, the time limits, hours of operations, and then also help the traffic officers set their enforcement priorities. That system is called a guide and enforcement system, and the information about where vehicles are parked in unpaid spaces is then being provided to the enforcement officers through an integrated handheld solution. This is a screenshot here that shows a map of potential violations where not every condition like that is an actual violation. We have other issues with exempt vehicles, with handicap placards and so forth. But it allows us to record that information and track it carefully. The off-street occupancy systems are primarily tied into the revenue control system at each of the off-street lots. There is one open lot where we're putting space sensors in each of the 63 spaces there because that one didn't have a revenue control system with gate arms. And then these lots are then sending that information to the central parking management system where the information is being distributed. The parking guidance system has several components to get this information out to the public. An internet website from the ExpressPark project, smartphone applications. We've partnered with both Parker from Streetline and ParkMe. On-street dynamic message signs, leveraging some existing signs that we had, and we are also going to be putting in 10 additional dynamic message signs and providing real-time traffic information, parking information rather, on signs that were mostly blank. And integration into our regional 511 system, and then in the future, hopefully that data will make its way into in-vehicle navigation systems. The parking management system has been developed by Xerox called Merge, and that's bringing all of the data from all these different components into one place where the data can be analyzed and we can get greater understanding, even though that these various pieces and components are coming from different vendors. And Arti from Xerox will be talking more about that following this presentation. Oh, and then the other critical part of Merge is it's supporting those parking rates and policy changes that we'll be talking about. Public outreach. So that was a critical component of our project because there's so much misunderstanding and public perception can be very negative when at first people hear, what? You're going to change the parking prices. You're going to drive away. You're just going to raise rates and drive away our customers. And so there were a number of ways that we reached out to the public, but one particularly effective way has been through this community advisory committee, where leaders from downtown in various business improvement districts, chambers of commerce, were called together and convened so where we could explain the project ahead of time, help them understand the theory behind it, because once they understood what it was all about, then they really had a better understanding of how that was helping their customers, actually improving business rather than driving it away. Then they had some valuable feedback, and we were able to incorporate some of that as partners in the project. So we've also got, I'll put them up here, brochures that you can snag on the way out. We had other marketing material and got some good stories through the media. And so far, cross fingers, the public response has generally been very positive. We haven't had any marches on City Hall, no really aggressive negative responses. There have been a couple people that needed to better understand what the choices were. In fact, one comment I saw was even that, look how inept City Hall is. I found that on one block the price was this, and across the street it was a very different price. They don't even know how to, what the prices are of their meters, not realizing that that was exactly the point, that we've given them choices. So public outreach is critical and has been a successful part of the project so far. So I wanted to go through some of the highlights of the on-street policy changes, and some of these differ from how they've been implemented in Asset Park, and again, largely because of our aggressive timeline, that we had to complete this demonstration project in 1 year. So with all the different things changing, time limits can change, hours of operations could change, and obviously the rates could change. One of the things that came out of our community advisory group was some consistency, and that consistency that we've established is that the changes are limited to the first Monday of the month. So while there's a lot of changes that can happen in different parts of the city, at least people know if they know the first Monday of the month is coming up, then they can check the website and find out how changes affect them. In parts of downtown, hours were extended from 6 to 8 p.m. In Los Angeles, 8 p.m. has now been the standard end of metered hours in the city. But because we knew ExpressPark was coming, we delayed implementing that in some areas of downtown until we had some data to help make that decision on. So we did make that change to the busier parts of downtown. There are other parts that, after 6 o'clock, the business closes, they roll down these doors, and that's it. There's no parking demand at all. So there we didn't just do a blanket extension of hours. We extended our time limits, which were primarily 1 hour throughout downtown, to 2 and sometimes 4 hours. That was one of the really critical pieces of feedback that we got from our downtown stakeholders, was they weren't comfortable yet going to 4-hour time limits everywhere or doing away with time limits entirely. They really wanted to get that guarantee that the space was going to turn over, because it was so critical to their business. And so one way we addressed that was by going as a standard to 2-hour time limits, and then where the retail frontage was, instead of businesses, was actually the side of a building or a parking lot, then we used a 4-hour time limit. And we've also, I wanted to show you, we had these little stickers that we've used in order to change the time limits quickly. One of the differences that we have in LA is that time limits, hours of operation, and rate were all very visible to the public on the street. And that's because the practice in Southern California is to have time limit signs on every block. So that's both a benefit and a challenge. The challenge is every time we want to change something, we've got to change those signs. And on all of our meters, whenever we had something other than a $1 rate, we had a sticker on the street side of the meter. So we've had to maintain those as well. But it's also been a very valuable public outreach tool. And then the demand-based pricing, obviously. We'll talk more about that. So one difference is our rates. We decided to change our rates in whole dollar increments primarily, except at the very low end where they go by 50-cent increments. Changes of 1 increment at a time. We're really going for that impact of the price change, so that without totally freaking people out, they realize, wow, something's different. That it used to be $2, now it's $3 over here, but it's still $2 on the other side of the street, to try to create that behavior change early on. And then the change in rate is based on the difference between the fraction of time that the block is overutilized and underutilized. We're also setting rates on each differently, on evaluating each block face, so each side of the street separately. And that may mean that some streets have rates that are half price just by going across the street. There are 3 successive phases to the project. Number 1, the first phase was just getting that base hourly rate correct. The second was time of day rates where appropriate. And then the third is in select areas, an adaptive demand-based rate where it actually could change in real time based on the demands that the sensors show. And Arti's going to talk some more about that when we get to it. We quickly went from, I'll just say, we started out with an environment where all of the rates were based on geography. Certain sections of the city were set rates. And then using the data from the sensors, going to adjusting those rates up and down. And our ordinance allowed us to adjust those rates by as much as 50% up or down from the council-approved baseline. But we quickly realized after a couple of months of changes that one rate throughout the day wasn't going to work for most of the places. And that moving to time of day rates was essential so that we could have different rates at different times of the day. And identifying when those rate changes, when those breaking points were going to happen, is something that Xerox's research team helped us with. This is ultimately we determined that breaks at 11 and 4 o'clock in the weekdays were the best time to break them. And we developed these maps that help folks understand what the rates were at different times of the day. We talked about the meter labels. Obviously, the rates are shown on the screen. We also have this max rate label. It was one way of trying to convey a time of day rate because it's a lot of information to process. So by showing the max rate rather than all the different possible rates, that could at least try to communicate to the public what the worst case scenario is, and then things could only get better from there. This is what the map looked like when we started. You can see blocks of different rates. This is where we are today, and you can see all different rates throughout. In most places, it's a really nice effect. Most places within a block or two, you can save quite a bit of money by changing your behavior. This is the result so far through the rate change in March. 59% of the spaces have had decreased rates, 16% unchanged, and only 25% of the spaces have had increased rates. Overall, which is quite refreshing, the average rate decreased 11% throughout downtown Los Angeles. So again, following up on Dr. Shoup's message earlier, that this debunks the myth that it was, a revenue grab by the city. And this has been our experience to date, very encouraging, that while we've had that 11% decrease in rate, we've had a 2% increase in revenue once we excluded the extended hours. Those hours from 6 to 8 p.m. that were extended are kind of an unfair increase, if you think about it that way, about evaluating the program if we threw those in there. So when we exclude that, we still have a 2% increase in revenue and an 11% increase in paid hours. Okay, so people, finger slip. So we've had over a 10% increase in the number of hours that people are able to use those metered spaces as the demand is spread across all of the on-street spaces. And as far as how that's impacted the congestion on those blocks of finding how easy it's been to find an available space, we've had a 6% reduction in the congested spaces overall, and that's looking at that greater than 90% occupancy in the neighboring spaces. And a 9% increase in what we're calling the just right spaces. That's where it's in that target 70 to 90%. So there haven't been huge changes, but when you look at it over the whole period of time, a lot of times that averaging can kind of dilute the effect. We've still seen a significant change. So I wanted to share that with you. Also, I think most of you are aware this was designated as a high-risk ITS project. The LA DOT completed the SEM through building off of San Francisco's hard work, and then we turned that over then to our prime contractor to complete and bring through implementation. I'm going to skip just to finish, that. So future project elements, we'll continue to implement time of day pricing. We'll be introducing the adaptive pricing in the next couple of months, integrating with the 511 service, expanding our dynamic message signs I mentioned, and then continue our public outreach. We're also looking forward to expanding this throughout more of the city, pending funding, and that's a real concern. We're coming up to a crossroads as the city is going to have to take over the funding of this project if it's going to continue. All right, I think I'll leave it there. I think we're going to save questions till later, Amir? All right.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you. That's exciting, and Dan took a few more minutes, and I think that's important because I think we wanted to start with a city's perspective of how a project that was, pie in the sky many years ago was now really implemented, and kudos to Dan and his staff for really implementing that. And I think one other difference between San Francisco and LA is going to be the data warehouse, where San Francisco had a contract with Oracle, and they have a data warehouse, and I think our next speaker is going to talk a little bit about that. But that was another difference where LA didn't have the funding and didn't have that ability as a budget crunch. Our IT section was being devastated, layoffs, and we weren't getting the support. So with that, I'd like to now introduce Arti Gupta with Xerox. Arti is the director of Xerox Corporation in the LA region, where she's responsible for the oversight of 7 parking citation processing projects, including the largest one, which is in Los Angeles. And it's run by a private company, formerly ACS and now Xerox, as well as she's the lead project manager for ExpressPark project. Before joining Xerox, Arti worked with Siemens for 9 years, where she was responsible for system consulting business as well as business development. Most of her career has been spent in transportation field working on system integration projects. She has a Ph.D. in civil engineering from University of Massachusetts and an MBA from UCLA. Arti?
So, as you just heard, Dan talked about what, from city's perspective, how the project has developed. What I'm going to be talking about is that what the role Xerox played in system integration and the responsibility that Xerox had for overall system development integration, working with our partners. So we were responsible for working with the meter vendors, the sensor vendors, the Amano systems, which provided the occupancy systems, and bringing all that information together into the system that Dan mentioned, which is the merge system. So we have provided a system to the city where all the data is coming in and the data is coming out for anybody who wants to use the data. So for example, interfacing with the 511 system, providing information to the DMS system to put the information on the signs for what messages should be put out, providing information to our vendors for putting the parking guidance applications, working with Streetline, where they are going to be talking about directed enforcement and their parker application. So that was the role that we played in terms of bringing in all these systems together. I'm going to be now spending some time on what we did in terms of data analytics and the pricing engine that helped cities implement all these pricing changes. So in terms of the pricing engine, what is pricing engine looking to make its recommendation? So what we did was, instead of looking at just pure occupancy and looking at what the average occupancy is over a certain time, we looked at the percentage of time the block was more than 90% occupied. So that for us was an factor FH, and this is where the block is really congested. Then we also looked at FL, the percentage of time that the block was underutilized. And then we looked at the difference. Into the microphone? Sorry. And then we looked at the difference between FH and FL. And that was basically to make sure that, that on a certain day, in the morning you can have a couple of hours when the block is really oversaturated, but in the evening the block is not very occupied. So on a day, if you look at it, say that my block is doing okay, I have about 70 to 90% occupancy, but that's not really true, because in the morning nobody can find parking. So then if you look at the difference between FH and FL and look at that to see that, okay, if I look at that difference and see whether I need to increase or decrease my price during that time. And actually it really helped out when we were looking at time of day pricing, which I'll talk in a second. So the factor that we chose here was 0.33. Now this is not cast in concrete. This is something that can be changed, but this was chosen to make sure that it was a conservative factor to begin with, to make sure that we are not choosing a factor that would change the prices on a block in a month, and then that second month it will ask us to change the price again. So we wanted to make sure that we kept the prices stable once we changed them. So if the factor was FH minus FL was greater than 0.33, we would increase the rate on that block. If it was less than minus 0.33, we would decrease the rate, and if it was in between, the rate would remain the same. Now, when we started looking at time of day pricing, there were a couple of things that we wanted to look at. First is that, should we be changing the time of day pricing for all blocks in the project area? The second thing was that should we be changing the price by time of day, or should we be also looking at the price on different days of the week? So one of the interesting things that we found when we looked at the data was that all Mondays on a certain block, all Tuesdays on a certain block, and all Wednesdays on the certain block, and so on and so forth, look very similar. So what we basically made the decision was that from Monday to Friday, we did not need to make the price changes. Those prices could remain the same within a block. But then, looking at the blocks, certain blocks we found, as these graphs show, that the demand was very different from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the evening. But again, this is the kind of pattern that we did not find on every block. So we sort of looked at all the project areas to see that which blocks would benefit from a time of day change. And based on that, we made this determination. So in terms of looking at what Dan talked about and how we helped the city in determining where the segment boundaries should be. So we looked at that. If you see, this is the second one, which is the second chart, which is showing you the 33% threshold that we were using. Here, if we looked at the number of mispriced hours. So, okay, if we start at, say, if we wanted to just have one segment, what we found was that 28% of the blocks would be mispriced. But if our best option was that we look at 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. If we looked at that block, that the second block was 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., that would have the minimum number of mispriced hours. However, one of the considerations that city had was that they didn't want to have a price segment which was lasted just for 1 hour. And the city has a lot of blocks where you have 10 hours, that is no parking, till 9 a.m. in the morning. So to take that into consideration, we moved the first block to 11 a.m. so that you had one block starting from whenever the enforcement is starting till 11 a.m. Then you had a second block from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and then the third block went on till 8 p.m. If there was a dance, it would be 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. it would be free, and then you would have a third rate for 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Otherwise, it would go directly from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Now, in terms of looking at, again, partitions, the other thing that we looked at was that should we be having partitions even for Saturday and Sunday? Should we be looking at Friday evening? Because the Friday evening was sort of looking much closer to a Saturday than necessarily for other days. So what this is showing is, this index is that, again, looking at the percentage of mispriced hours, what we found was that we could make the system very complicated from the perspective of the city and the park, and as well as the parkers, if we wanted to have more improvement. But then what benefit do we get out of it? I mean, if you look at the number of segments, if we went from 4 to 6 or 7 here, where the index from 4 to 6, we are getting a 2% improvement. But what that means is that now city has to have different rates on Saturday also. So that's why we went with the index 4 here, which had 3 rates for Monday to Friday period, but then just 1 rate for Saturday. So in all, there were 4 different time of day rates is what we ended up implementing. This is one of the graphs that we wanted to show you. This just basically shows you the tools that we developed for the city that allows them to look at the data very quickly and see what the effect is. So what this is showing is that in the top here, this is showing what the occupancy was before city changed their enforcement hours. So you see a lot of red here in the beginning till about June 4th. And after June 4th, what you see is that as the city shifted their enforcement hours, how the demand has shifted. And basically people have started parking between 4 and 6, and now the demand has basically shifted to 6 o'clock. And then once it becomes free again, people have started parking. What this also shows is that there's a lot of demand in the evening. So this can be used by the city to increase their enforcement hours if they wanted to in the future, because you can see that the demand, there is quite a bit of demand even after 8 p.m. in the evening. So this is, again, some of the things that Dan talked about, that, that are the pricing changes working? And this is a graph that shows that we had after, sometime in December. And what we have found is that we have had a 10% reduction in the number of congested blocks that we have in the city. And we have seen that the underutilized blocks have gone down by about 5%. So we have been able to shift the demand, and that's what we were looking for. Now, motivation for dynamic pricing. As Amir said, Dan comes from a traffic signal system background, so we have adaptive traffic control. So we wanted to see if dynamic pricing works here the same way as adaptive traffic control works for the traffic signals. And so here we looked at that, that are there blocks where the occupancy fluctuates in a month on different days on different days. And what we found was that it's not true everywhere, but there are some blocks where 50% of the days the block is 95% full. 50% of the days the block is about 60% full. And if we were to look at the average occupancy over the month, we would say it's about 80%. Again, within 70% and 90% threshold that we want, but this will not be. This will be very misleading because there are days when you don't have enough parking there. So looking at an example on a main street on 200 block, if you were looking at this, there are 48 days in this data that we were looking at where the blocks would be over congested. There will be about 88 days where the blocks are under congested, and only 84 days where you have blocks that in the right place where you want them to be in terms of parking availability. And again, a tool like this will tell you that you see a lot of combination of red, green, and yellow, red, blue, and yellow that you see here that tells you that how the demand for this block is changing over that period that we were looking at, that it is not uniform. So in this particular block, what would happen is that if we either went with a flat rate or with the time of day, it will basically tell us a constant rate for all hours, for all days. But if we went with dynamic pricing, 50% of the time the rate would increase and the 18% of the time the rate would decrease. So again, this block is a good candidate for dynamic pricing. So of course, we can't talk about LA and not talk about package use. So one of the things that we did, we looked at was that this graph, that now that we have occupancy data and we have payment data, we sort of looked at, compared those two pieces of data to see that based on that data, could we conjecture where the placard use is happening? And we sort of developed an index which looking at how long people were parking, what people parking to begin with, what types of arrival and departure pattern were there on a block, and we developed that essentially an index that would say that whether there is a use handicap placard use, how bad or good it is at that block. And what you see here is the green says that the index is low, and then red and orange is that the index is very high. And there are blocks in LA where you have handicap placard use during the enforced hours, which is almost like 60 to 90%. You go there and the block is full chock of handicap placards. So what you see here is that in a block in August where we made some price changes, the handicap placard use was lower, lower or medium. And you see that there is a reduction in occupancy. So the index that you see is that this is lower part of the areas where you had lower handicap placard use, you saw that there was less, the occupancy did decrease the desired effect. Where in the December, we made changes in area where there was higher use of placard use. And what you see here is that actually the occupancy went up. That more people started parking there because they were using, there was more handicap placard use. It was a completely reverse effect. So Dan has talked about some of the Intercept surveys that we conducted to see if people were aware of the LA ExpressPark project and that how drivers determined where they parked. So in this, one of the things that we did was that we wanted to look at that, do people understand the maximum rate sticker that we had there for time of day pricing? Because there was a lot of debate within our group to say that that what we are doing is that the maximum time that we are telling people 11 to 4 is $4, whereas in the evening and in the morning the rate is much lower and nobody knows about it. So how will people know when they get to the place where to park, what the rate there is? And then the second thing we wanted to also see is that if we are making all these changes, and though we are using all these applications, we have a website, do people really understand that different rates exist on different blocks? So we did an Intercept survey in February where we went and looked at, where we went and showed these stickers to people and asked them what they thought about it. And most people thought that people were not aware of, a lot of people were not aware of pricing on adjacent blocks, but they thought that, if they didn't know it, that they would park in a different place. And the second thing that they said was that they didn't understand the maximum rate sticker very well, but they did understand this rate sticker that we have here, where it tells you what the parking rates are. And we are working with the city to see if we can implement more of these in other areas. So in conclusion, this project is on the way of showing that the parking can be used to change parking behavior. Challenge is to make parkers aware of changing prices. And the second thing is that different areas in the cities benefit from different types of rates. And that's not just true in LA, it would be true in a lot of different cities, that it can't be a one solution for the entire city. And data analysis using a pricing intellect tool that we have developed is crucial to determining the rate changes, that what rate should be implemented where. And the third thing is that factors such as handicap placard use can affect the outcome of price changes, and we need to be aware of that.
Thank you, Arti. And I think you can see how the power of analytics and data can really support city administrators and elected officials. And I think that's what, especially in LA, the politics are a little bit different, as I would say, and I'm sure it is in San Francisco as well. But again, I think it's the power of having that data, that you're no longer guessing. This isn't the parking administrator talking about its actual data. As Zia puts his computer, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. So we heard from the city's perspective. We heard from Xerox, who's the prime contractor. Now we're going to hear from one of the key components. A lot of times we call it the heartbeat of a dynamic pricing, which is the sensors. Zia Yusuf is a seasoned senior technology executive with a track record of leading companies to success. He's currently the CEO of Streetline, Inc., the leading global provider of sensor-enabled smart city solutions. Just prior to his role with Streetline, Zia was entrepreneur in residence at Sutter Hill Ventures and Norwest Venture Partners. He spent the last 10 years at SAP, where he was executive vice president and a member of SAP's executive leadership team. At SAP, he led the company's efforts in key areas, including co-founding the SAP Markets, a B2B market company, and founding the leading global ecosystem and partner group, where he managed a network of 7,500 partners, award-winning SAP online communities of innovation, and $125 million SAP NetWare Fund. Zia has an MS in International Affairs from Georgetown University, MBA from Harvard Business School, and a BA from Macalester College. And he's also an associate consulting professor at Stanford University. Zia.
Thank you, Amir. Good afternoon, everybody. Amir, next time, thank you for the introduction. Next time, just say, here's Zia, a good friend of mine, and I can start talking, and that should do it. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a delight to be here, and especially being associated with this project. So I'm the CEO of Streetline. I'll go through and obviously share with you what we did with Streetline together with our partners. And the thing is, going through Arti's slides, and you see this incredible amount of data and information and dynamic pricing. This is the changing world of parking. I mean, this wasn't possible 2 years ago even, because you didn't have the data and information. And so it's just fascinating that the bulk of our presentation, which was very good, was around looking at the data and information. Now, to generate that, you have to do something to generate it. You can't have people go out there and use clipboards every 6 months to do a parking study. And I think that's how the world has changed. So our partnership with LA DOT, and Amir, forgive me for these little old pictures here, has gone on for a while. So we started in Hollywood, and this for Streetline was kind of real kind of groundbreaking from that perspective. We went down to Venice. Oh, I put Venice here twice. This is Studio City is the one in the middle. This is what happens when you're on your second bottle of wine. It was good wine. And of course, we transitioned to LA ExpressPark, and we're delighted to be the technology foundation for that, as well as the app. So we have sensors in 6,100 places. The technology foundation, both in terms of accuracy and latency, we blew through the numbers, and you can talk to the other folks about that. We are also providing the guided enforcement app, and this obviously has an impact on the revenue. As when I talk to the press and analysts, I tell them there's always a yin and yang. We help you find a parking spot, we help you pay for it through Park Mobile and so on. If you don't do any of that, then the parking enforcement folks are also a little smarter. So it's about increasing both sides of it. And the partnership with Xerox on their Immerse system, which is a very impressive system, has been great. So that's kind of the broader context of our relationship with LA. I wanted to put this up, and I don't know if David Cummins is in the room. Is David here? No? Yes? David. I stole your article graphic here, so apologies for that. But it was a publication. I think this is a topic that is somewhat kind of under talked about, is how important it is for leading vendors to come together. It's an old industry in some sense, but it's going through these changes, and the leading technology companies need to come together and put aside some of the differences, work with the city, and in this case with Amir first, and then Dan and the rest of the LRDO team. It's truly being a partnership, and I think having each company focus in on their strength, this is what will kind of set the foundation, not just for this project, but I think for us at the industry, and it's been great working with all the other partners. And Dan, on time, yes?
Yes.
On budget, yes?
I believe so, yes.
And on spec?
Yes.
Okay. Justin, you have the camera, right? Okay, so just a few words just to put it in context on Streetline for those of you that may not be familiar with the company. So in essence, the company's been around for about 5 years. I joined about 2.5 years ago. Always wanted to work in the parking industry, and that's been great. The parking providers and consumers, this is the marketplace that we're trying to put together. That's at the end of the day what Streetline is doing. We're known for our sensors. We've been doing this work, and now we do it globally in a very scalable way. But at the end of the day, we're about the data and about the applications. We have the best-in-class sensors, at least we believe, and we bring all this data together. The sensors, the on-street, off-street data, we've now partnered with Amano to bring that in. And then we have a series of applications on top. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on them, only touch on a couple that were really associated with the ExpressPark project. But we have the Parkside application suite, that's the analytics and so on. We have ParkEdge, which is related to the garages, and it's a publishing platform for garages. And of course, we'll talk about Parker. And I have several colleagues here in the room who you can talk to later. So this is essentially how it came together, and also for ExpressPark. So in the beginning, and I'll show you the sensing network, and I like kind of showing real life stuff. Otherwise, PowerPoint tends to be a good thing to put people to sleep. So we capture the data on the left. So we do this through a variety of sensing mechanisms. Our sensors, we work with gate providers to get the data from there. We have now 18,000 garages in our system. That garage data has essentially become a commodity, but we can bring that in there. And then there's a series of applications on top. And you saw Xerox talk about their great dynamic pricing engine. That's one piece of it. Streetline has other things. And then, very importantly, pushing that data out to a range of stakeholders. And Parker was the first and is still the only rail app that provides that real-time data. But now it's time to get that information out through a variety of sources, and we'll talk about that as well. So the sensors piece of it. So we essentially put sensors on the ground, and it's a very interesting conversation earlier about the truck sensors, and those folks are still in the room. Happy to talk to you about sensors for your truck stalls as well. I think we can do that. But we can put the sensors for metered spaces, non-metered spaces. We're now doing sensors for parking spots in handicap spaces in Oregon State University. We're doing no parking zones in Birmingham in the UK. So there's a variety of different situations where you can put a sensing environment, whether to tell you there's a car there, car not there. And obviously we connect with the meters to also get the information on pricing. So in this case with the IPS meters or digital meters or Siemens meters or McCain meters, it doesn't matter from that perspective. The sensors themselves, so you see the two models there, the white one. The blue one is the one that we use now. That's the embedded sensor. Siemens does, another partner of ours, does all of our physical deployments. It only takes 5 to 7 minutes to actually physically deploy a sensor. It's pretty straightforward. Drill a hole in the ground, with a glue gun, you put glue there, and you stamp on it, and then you put the network up, and you're up and running. So they can go out and put in 200, 300, 400 of these a day and get you up and running. The sensors last 4.5 to 5 years on 2 AA lithium batteries. There's full firmware on the sensors, so they're field programmable, and we're continuously pushing data and information out to the sensors to manage the battery. And we have a full back-end system. It's essentially like managing a wireless network environment. And we just announced a partnership with Cisco that I think will further strengthen that. The mesh network, it's a multi-hop mesh network, which essentially means that any sensor kind of just talks to the next sensor. There doesn't have to be any line of sight and so on and so forth. Streetline has been doing this for 5 years. We're now in 30 different locations. There's a lot of learning that goes into this. I mean, it's not a simple matter of here's a sensor, oh, I can detect a car. doing this at scale, doing it every single day, 24/7, all weather conditions, all different types of scenarios, metal content. And our sensors, by the way, are metal and light. So there's a dual detection mechanism. So part of my putting my computer on was just to give you a kind of a live thing on the sensor. So we're going to use our friends at Google to just go down to LA. So this is to give you a sense of how the sensing network is set up. So first, you've got the sensors on the ground. So those are the white things. You've got a sensor on each parking spot. Then for every about 8 to 10 sensors, you put a little repeater up on a light pole. It's about this big, battery powered as well, and you essentially use a plastic thingy-majiggy to put it up on a light bulb. That's a technical term. And then you've got a gateway box. In this case, the gateway box is here. That's the only thing that's line powered, and it's essentially a small Linux box. So there's about 225 to 250 sensors per Linux box. So the system is infinitely scalable. So in LA now we have 10,000 of these spaces. We can go to 20,000, 50,000, and each of these networks is separate. So it's not like if one goes down, the whole thing goes down. And then of course you've got the mesh link that covers all of this. And if you actually look at this at a street view level, you see actually what's going on. And so that's essentially what's going on the ground. So you've got this sensing environment, and you're essentially creating this live mesh network there. Now, the thing is that the cost of this mesh network has been also going down over time. The cost of the sensors has been going down. Streetline designs all of this internally. As I said, Siemens deploys it, and we have other people that develop it. And one of the things that we're doing, and something for all of us to think about, is one of the reasons for the partnership with Cisco is once you lay out this mesh network, you can put other sensing devices underneath that as well. So you can put sensors in fire hydrants, you can put them in light poles, you can put pollution sensors, you can start using that communication network for other things. And the ROI on parking is so strong that that's a discussion that can happen as well. So then you've got obviously the apps on top. This is Parkside, which is our analytics platform. We can talk about that in private if you want. ParkEdge has been important as part of that LA process. We provide this publishing platform that allows garages to manage their data themselves. We're not a big believer in just screen scraping other people's data and putting it in. We want the garages to manage this data, push out coupons, push out reservations, and our ParkEdge platform does that, and we have almost all the garages in LA on this. Parker has been talked about with Dan, and this has been kind of a big piece of the puzzle here for us. We came out, Parker was first launched in Hollywood, and it was certainly a very proud moment for us as the first app in the world to have real-time parking data from the street. And it's still, something that's a little magical. I mean, people obviously expect Facebook and Yelp and all these kinds of things, but somehow getting the information from the street around the corner and seeing, oh, I can tell you that there's 2 parking spots around the corner is still a pretty impressive thing. And we won all kinds of awards and so on, but this last one was really cool, so I mentioned it here. We were the Best Mobile Smart City Award from the Mobile World Congress. We beat out 600 apps to win that, which was a couple of weeks ago, which we were quite proud of, and as should the parking industry be, because it was a parking app. You'll notice on the right-hand side, this is against the advice of my marketing team, my legal team, my finance team, my sales team, and my engineering team. I'm putting this up here. So we've spent now 2 years working with the existing Parker app. We've received a lot of information and data on how people look at it, what's the best way to present it. And we will be coming out with a brand new version of this very shortly, which I think will do even better. So we're delighted to that. If you're nice, I can show it to you, but I can't publicly launch it, but that's what it will look like. The other thing that we launched 2 weeks ago, and this is something we talked to Dan recently about, is getting this data out. The merchants are a big piece of the puzzle. You want the merchant community to be able to have access to this data. And so we built this a tool called the Parker Map, which in essence allows any merchant, any business, to themselves connect into that live data and show it on their website. Okay? And so, again, in the spirit of showing you live stuff, and Dan will forgive me for this. So this is the Parker Map website. And just when I was sitting there, I put in a new business, Dan's Parking Bar and Grill. So after he's retired from LADOT, he'll be opening that. That's the address. So you can go in as a business owner. You just type in this information, your name and your address. That comes up with this text down here. You just copy and paste that text. You can do all this yourself. And you put it onto your website, onto your map. So this is the city of downtown San Mateo. This is their website. It's all live. And you see their Google map here with the live parking data. This is live right now. It's telling you what that information is on each spot. So very easily and very quickly, as a merchant, as a business, we're giving the ability to benefit from the investment that the city has done to get that data and information. And you can see also Oregon State, same thing. This is their map. There's 4 spaces here. There's 2+ spaces here. And this is their website. So this is about kind of taking that next logical step. First, that data and information was in Parker. We're also in pretty heavy discussions with a range of automakers and so on to get this information out. Finally here, again, from our perspective, and I hope Arti and Dan and Amir feel the same thing, for me, it's always about a partnership. I hate being treated like a vendor because I think that's a very myopic view of the world. Yes, we have to deliver, but when you're trying to break new ground and you're looking at new things, it has to be a partnership. There's ups and downs and you have to learn, and that's been the case. The team has certainly been innovating for success, willing to learn and adapt, and most importantly, very citizen-focused. At the end of the day, we all have to learn how to focus on that end consumer, on that motorist. And that's the way Streetline looks at the world, is how do you look at the motorist and work backwards. And I said, again, strong partners. And we've learned through this effort, how to scale up to tens of thousands of sensors. So it's been a fantastic experience. Hope we continue to do it. And with that, I will stop. Thank you very much.
Allison Yo, unfortunately, could not be with us this afternoon. She sends her regret. But however, we're lucky to have Dan Chatman with us. Dan is the Assistant Professor of City and Regional Planning at UC Berkeley's Department of City and Regional Planning, where his research areas of interest include travel behavior in the built environment, residential, workplace, big and smart growth, economic growth of cities. He told me to skip it, but he's going to talk a little bit more about himself. But we're really excited to have you because Dan's also going to be on the panel tomorrow about with SF Park. So we're happy to have you, Dan. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Allison Yo from UCLA. Actually, Allison had a pressing deadline and frankly probably didn't have a talk together, so she asked me to take her place, and she and I are working together on this joint evaluation of SF Park and of LA ExpressPark, and so she says that she's going to give me a beer and her firstborn child, which I realized that the reason that she wanted to give me her firstborn child, which she already has a firstborn child, just to be clear what's going on here, is that he has a diorama due next week, and it's going to be a whole lot of work. So I went for the beer, and then she has to babysit my secondborn. That's the deal. So I wanted to make just a few comments, and I want to keep it short because we're kind of getting over time, and so I'm going to try to keep it to 5 minutes. I'm deploying sensors as well. My sensors take about 2 or 3 days of training and an hour BART ride each way from Berkeley to San Francisco to deploy, which is a little bit longer than these other sensors. So I'm firmly in the world of non-tech in doing our evaluation, and we're doing this in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, and I'll talk about San Francisco tomorrow, but we're looking at a number of other measures that one cannot get with sensors, and that includes things like, or probably one could. I don't want to get an argument about this because you probably could do this with sensors, but things like the number of occupants in the vehicle, the race ethnicity of the driver, the make, model, and condition of the vehicle, because we're looking at some issues having to do with sociodemographics. We're also looking at reasons for non-payment, which include disabled placards as well as a lot of other things, such as a very popular reason for non-payment, which is not paying. Disabled placard or no. And these are interesting questions because it is, as Arti was talking about and everyone has been talking about, a very important issue in evaluating the success of pricing is understanding how it's being affected by non-payment, and therefore prices just aren't having an effect for those people. In fact, they may be increasing the incentive to go out and get disabled placards. I won't mention it tomorrow, so I can mention it now, that the disabled placard use in San Francisco nearly doubled over a very short period of time in the recent past. Not necessarily related to SF Park at all, but it did happen, apparently, in terms of people coming over the Bay Bridge. So I want to talk about implementation issues. And so right now, in the SF Park case, we have a lot of data, and I'll talk about it tomorrow. In the LA Express Park case, we have not yet gotten multiple rounds of observations of data for reasons which have been alluded to, having to do with the rapidity of the program's implementation, and also some challenges that we've had in trying to identify those blocks that were likely to experience price changes, so that we are going out there and we're looking at just a few dozen blocks. In the case of LA, we're looking at 62 blocks, and only a small percentage of those has been changing price because of the way that it's been kind of spatially targeted in that case. It's been different in the SF Park case, and so it's been easier to observe changes in price. And just to understand what's actually happening, James Glassnap is here in the audience from Xerox Park, and there's a great paper that he and a co-author wrote about how people are sort of likely to respond to price changes, how they're likely to respond to the notion of, for example, being able to reserve a space ahead of time. Will that help their decision-making process? And the question of how people respond is a hard question to answer with sensors. We have to go out and talk to them. We have to go observe them. And I think that I want to remind us all that that kind of information is the sort of thing that we will want to supplement these kinds of information that we have now from sensors. So I want to talk about a few implementation issues which I think are really important, and then I'm going to stop so that there's time for questions. One of them is the ways in which we calculate the rates that we're trying to apply in order to reduce occupancy to that magic level. And there are different ways of doing it. And Arti presented a way which, as I understand it, was based on hourly averages. One could do minute-by-minute averages. One could look at the percentage of time that there is always one space available versus the 90% or 85% idea. The idea being, what gets people not to cruise? In other words, if that's your objective function, and by the way, maybe it isn't, but if your objective function is trying to reduce the extent of parking search, one of the stated motivations for doing this, how do you set the price to achieve that goal? It's going to depend in part upon what data you look at. So I think that the issue of data is really important, and I'll talk about that a bit more tomorrow. Another big issue is the role of information versus the role of the price in people's decision making. So is it that they need to know that there's availability? Is the certainty the issue? Or is it sufficient to know that if they show up, there will be a space available? Because in the latter case, a price, at least theoretically, and there's some implementations regarding this question, if the price can be set right theoretically, there will be a space available. No app would be needed in that instance, unless you wanted to know what price you'd pay, right? And if there was a lot of variation in price, if we couldn't get prices that worked in this way, except by having lots and lots of variation daily, then we would have an issue with information for sure. So this is a kind of an open question. I think, frankly, we don't know the answer to this question because we don't know how people are going to respond, and different sorts of people will respond differently. I was speaking to someone, David, the owner of LAZ, I don't know if he's still here, who is owner of a private parking operation, who's looking at the question of reservations and whether or not people would pay for certainty. In other words, they know they'll have a space. Money is not the issue for this crowd. Okay? They just want to know they have a space. They'll pay $20. They'll pay an extra $10. Versus this question of price-sensitive people responding and modifying their behavior according to price. So this question about information and certainty, I think, is critical to the extent in the following way. Are we going to do things with price? Are we going to do it with information? What's the joint role of these two factors? As a quick example of this issue, implementation issues in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, one of the big problems in understanding how people respond to these changes is that there's so many different things going on all at once. Number one, time limits are being relaxed, but not the same everywhere. From 1 to 2 hours, or from 2 to 4 hours. In San Francisco, from 2 or 1 hour to 4 hours, or unlimited parking. That's a very different scenario that you're facing as a parker, and as a result, you can park for a much longer time. Price has nothing to do with that necessarily, right? So there's the issue of various kinds of regulatory impediments. Another quick example of this is in Los Angeles. What's the maximum price in Los Angeles?
It can go as high as 6.
It can go as high as 6. Frankly, I can say this because I'm an academic and I can be an economist. That's way too low. It needs to be higher if we want price to work in that way. So if price isn't going to work as the rationing mechanism, then it's going to be something else. It's going to have to be some other form of regulation. And there are good arguments to using price, depending on how you use the funds. Which brings me to another issue about implementation, and then I'm going to stop, which is how are the funds used? Now, we've heard several different possibilities here. And one of them is that we're using them to improve business districts. Another possibility is that we're using them to improve public transportation. Yet another possibility is you take the funds and you use them to actually mitigate the impacts of the behavior that you're pricing. So what I'm talking about there is just the congestion impacts, the pollution impacts. What are you going to do about that? Well, maybe you'll buy carbon credits. I don't know. But the point is that at least you have a price there that is actually transferring, kind of internalizing the externalities of this behavior of driving that has these kind of problematic consequences. So I'll be talking about the actual data that we have in San Francisco's case, which is 3 rounds of observations of a number of blocks in San Francisco later. But let me just close by mentioning that the purpose of pricing. I don't know how many people were here for the mobility symposium in this building last year at around this time, where I talked about some of the parking data that we have for SF. And I wanted to mention some things that I mentioned there, which is that pricing functions in many, many ways. It's a finance mechanism, potentially. It's a congestion reduction mechanism. That's what I've been talking about a little bit, right? It's also, you can think about it as not even as a congestion reduction mechanism, but as a means of internalizing to people's decision-making external costs that they impose upon others, which is kind of this highfalutin social welfare argument, which I think Don left behind him far long ago because he's actually interested in making the world better as opposed to something much more abstract. I say that as number 47 out of 60 editors of Don's book, when I was a Ph.D. student at UCLA. So I know Don. You did keep that kittens fighting underneath the blanket thing in the book. We argued about that. It's a metaphor I was arguing with him about, but it's still there. And then pricing, finally, pricing is something that in a customer-oriented environment like private industry, pricing is not something the customer wants, right? The customer does not want to pay a higher price. So this is a conundrum that we face in terms of having partnerships with the private sector, is figuring out how to deal with that. Sure, information, great, that's fine. Give me lots of information. But increase the price is a more problematic concept, and we have to figure out how to do that in partnership. And those are my comments. Thanks.
I want to start off with maybe 1 or 2 questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. As I promised, I think we're on time, so we should have plenty of time for your questions. I think, Dan, thank you. You kind of touched on what you saw as some of the implementation challenges. What I like to ask maybe Dan, Arti, and Zia is what has been the biggest challenge for each of you, respectively, as you've managed this project, and how did you overcome that?
I'd say that probably the biggest challenge is the public perception challenge, because, as I mentioned in my talk earlier, the initial reaction is, oh my gosh, you're going to raise the price of parking right in front of my business. It's going to, the economy's bad enough. Aren't you just you're going to drive more of my customers away? But when people understand, well, if all of those spaces in front of your business are full, there's no place for your customers to park anyway, and instead now they have choices. They can save money by parking across the street or around the corner. I think that's been very powerful. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge that I think we have overcome. If sometimes there's this kind of latent disgruntledness that's hiding under the surface, but so far it hasn't emerged. So I'm hoping that we've helped people understand.
So from our perspective as the system integrator, I think our biggest challenge has been time. Because we were trying to do this project within 7 months. And even within that, our charter was to have all the sensors and all the meters deployed in 6,000 spaces in like 3 months. And have everything deployed and tested and integrated. So, we came through with most of this stuff, but that was the biggest challenge.
I think it's just the time is certainly there are lots of pieces. This is the first time San Francisco did it. This is a different scale, if you will, bringing all the pieces together. The merge system from Xerox, making sure that we're upscaling at 10,000 spaces, providing those data streams and those APIs that have never existed before. So you just discover things there that take you longer than it should. But the good thing about software is it's you can figure your way through it with smart people. So.
One other question. Can you perhaps elaborate a little bit more specifically about behavioral changes? There was a lot of analytics, there's a lot of data, but just kind of what do you think you can describe that maybe if you were to do this in front of the city council and the mayor, how did you change behavior?
Well, I'd say initially what we know at this point is that we've made it easier to find parking. We've made several attempts at quantifying how much easier, but we know that it is easier. The other thing we can say is that we've now created opportunities to save money by distributing the demand over all of the spaces. So I think that we can say. What we don't yet know is how has that helped to reduce traffic congestion. We can theorize if it's easier to find a space that there's less time spent looking for parking, but we're going to have to wait until a lot more data is analyzed to understand how that's impacted traffic congestion and the resulting pollution, which is our ultimate goal.
Any other comments?
Well, what I would like to add to that is that the data right now is showing that we have reduced congestion, but one needs to look at it from the perspective that we only have data for first year. So one of the things we need to be able to do is once we have data for a couple of more years, to be able to isolate the effect of seasonal changes. So we haven't been able to look at the seasonality with this data. So we are hoping that these changes that we have got in is because of the pricing changes and the time limits and the enforcement hours. But in order to really know for sure that this is what is happening, we need at least 2-3 years of data.
I'll just add to Arti's response that we had sampled areas of downtown where we have over a year's worth of before data. But that hasn't all been fed into Xerox's system. So from Xerox's perspective there, you can't analyze for that year. That was a new system that's been developed for the project. Just for those that don't know it, the FHWA has one contractor, Battelle, that's evaluating all the congestion reduction demonstration projects. And so they're tasked with that challenge of understanding the impacts, in addition to the understanding the seasonality.
It might be relevant to point out, though, that there's a difference between congestion of parking, which is what you were using the term.
Yes.
So you've demonstrated that there's a reduction in crowded blocks. Mm-hmm. But then there's the question as to whether that has impacts on cruising and congestion on the road.
All right, before I take a question, I do want to acknowledge Pierre Gent, who's in the audience. Pierre is the actual project manager for LA ExpressPark, and I know that he's been an excellent partner for Dan and myself when I was there. And if you guys can't find Dan, Pierre's here in the audience. He's done a great job, and thank you for that. So I'm going to go there first.
2 questions. What happens at the end of the year? Does this project go dark? Do the sensors is nobody looking at the sensors anymore? And second question, what would happen if the 90% were brought to the Shubian 85%? How do you think that would affect performance?
Okay, for the first question, it's still an open issue. So the issue's been the feds have funded this for the first year, the demonstration year. And now it's up to the city that budgets on an annual basis, a fiscal year, whether, and we're coming up on our budget cycle, whether the city, whether this can be, the benefits can be described at this early stage in enough detail to help the city council understand that it's worth funding, at least to some extent, to continue on and keep the program alive. So I think that's an ongoing challenge, and it's an open question that we don't know the answer to. The second issue, what would happen if you reduced that threshold? Well, it isn't 85% as one number is a challenge to meet, because it's 85% over what time period, right? 85% over an hour. In our case, we're looking at it minute by minute, but we developed a range rather that's 70 to 90 rather than the fixed 80. 85.
Asking, what if it were 70 to 85?
Oh, it was 70 to 85. Well, it would be, I guess you would have less of the blocks meeting that, but the 90% came from if you've got a block that has, or if you look at the neighboring 10 spaces, that you have at least one available. And every block, you have blocks of different lengths. So it's a challenge to say that it would be on that particular block. But if you look at the range of 100 feet, that you could have one space available to you in that area.
Let's go right there. That's a very important question. That's something that we expect that will come out of this eventually. At this stage, we're still in the middle of it. But there are some key expenses that I would say drive this continuing. The meter equipment itself, I think you could evaluate separately, because there are a lot of benefits to the meter equipment itself that facilitates this, but you really don't have to bundle that into it. And what we've done, even in our project costs, is segregate that out. Those are operational costs that even if LA ExpressPark goes away tomorrow, we're still going to keep operating the parking meters. But we're looking very closely at some of the other major costs, staffing, management system, sensors, although it's emerging technology, and as that's deployed more and more, costs should start to come down. But it is very expensive to have real-time data. I'm sure Zia and other providers could speak to that, and all the analytics that are necessary. But the question is, how can that be supported? And one of the easiest ways to support it is through enforcement revenue. If the benefits of guided enforcement support the cost of the sensors, then the other data from parking guidance and for policy is an easy sell. If those two purposes need to stand on their own, then you've got a bigger challenge, because there isn't a revenue goal, as you mentioned. We're allowing the rates to fluctuate based on demand, and what we've seen in San Francisco, from what Dr. Shoup shared, and what we've seen here, is really kind of a revenue neutral from a meter perspective. So that needs to be supported in other ways, and that's data we don't have yet.
what are the economic benefits? And after you weed out all the exogenous factors that trouble us, what are the pollution benefits and so forth? So we're going to have to wait for that. My challenge right now is how do I get enough information to the city council to support extending it while we're figuring all that out.
So Amir, if I could just comment on that. So besides LA ExpressPark, we're in 30 different locations, cities, universities, and so on, for things as low as 200-300 spaces, San Mateo, San Carlos, Jacksonville, Ellicott City, and so on. We generally charge, and it's public information, $15 to $20 per space per month. That's for everything. That's the sensors, the network, the apps, everything on top of it. So if you think about that $15 to $20 cost per space per month, to Dan's point, if you just look at the enforcement piece, not the convenience of guidance for consumers, not all the congestion stuff, not all the benefits of dynamic pricing, if you write one extra ticket per space per month, $30, $40, you're paying for more than twice that cost of managing that space. And so that's just the enforcement piece of it. And we've seen in LA and Hollywood and others that the enforcement stuff can almost double in terms of the number of tickets, because the enforcement officer goes to that exact spot where there's a violation instead of just going up and down and hoping to find a spot. So that's one way to think of it. And so it is definitely not a millions and millions dollar effort, and we are proving that in the smaller projects across cities and universities.
Another way to think about this is that if the congestion problems are bad in any place, then the price could probably be ramped up high enough that the price itself could pay for a lot of these. So it seems to me there's an important connection that we need to keep, that I would like to keep on emphasizing, which is the price for the parking itself is probably highly correlated with the extent of the problem where you'd actually want to spend the money for the sensors. If you do not have a problem with parking, I wouldn't know why you put the sensors in. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then one brief comment, which is that City of Seattle has been doing this in a low-tech way and has been doing it fairly successfully, and they're actually part of the pilot. So if you want to look at it, there's a publication or two out there on the City of Seattle.
All right, guys, I'm sorry I'm told it is past our time. I want to give everyone, please give a round of applause to the panel. They did a great job. And they're all going to be here for questions.
Before we wrap up, I'd like to just and head to our reception. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to present a Smart Solution Spotlight Award to this really cool new startup company that came out of UC Berkeley, out of research that began here. It's called Automatic, and as you know, ITS America recognizes new and innovative technologies on a regular basis, basically to highlight them, to get them deployed, to get them shared, to get Congress talking about them, to get the press talking about them. And this is Automatic is just one of those kind of companies. It's developed a product that Fast Company has described as a visionary gadget that makes any driver more fuel efficient. And CNBC has said Automatic could do for driving what the iPod did for music. They just launched yesterday, so it's a really exciting time. Unfortunately, they've just sold out yesterday, too. So they took the plastic off, and this is basically a tool that uses the car's own computer diagnostics to send information to a smartphone app about engine problems, parking locations, the costs of driving, your driver behavior. And so we've got a short video clip right now that we're going to show you about this. We'll give them the award, and then we'll go to the reception.
Cars have had powerful computers inside them for years, but that hasn't really improved the way that we drive them. In creating Automatic, we set out to unlock our car's potential and redefine people's relationship to driving, making it safer, more efficient, and fun. We did this by introducing your car to your smartphone. It all starts with the Automatic link. Just plug it into your car's data port and follow the simple instructions on screen. Now your car and smartphone will connect wirelessly whenever you drive. Most people don't realize just how big an impact their driving style can have on fuel efficiency. You can save up to a third on gas with only a few adjustments to how you drive. And Automatic helps you do that without being a backseat driver. It learns about your driving style and gives you subtle audio cues when you do things that waste gas. like accelerating quickly. The app shows your weekly drive score and trip timeline, so you can track your progress and see where to improve. A high score could save you hundreds on gas every year. When you drive, Automatic monitors your car's health and warns you if something's wrong. So if your check engine light comes on, you'll see a description of the problem and possible solutions. You can even clear the light yourself and save a trip to the mechanic. Because Automatic connects to your car when you drive, it always knows where you parked. Your family can even access that location for seamless car sharing. Accidents happen, and far too often there isn't someone there to help. If you're ever in a crash, Automatic alerts 911 with your location. It can even contact your loved ones to let them know what's happened and that help is on the way. We wanted to reimagine what driving could be, and I think we did that with Automatic. We believe that cars should live up to their potential and that every driver can be a smarter driver. That's why we created Automatic, the smart driving assistant.
So how cool is that? So at this time, I'd like to invite Gabriel Valdivia and Yuba Milkovich up here to join me on stage. Now, on behalf of ITS America, I'd like to present you with the Smart Solutions Spotlight Award in recognition of your smart driving application. And so... Look at the smile.
I've done this before.
Okay. Yeah, and then, so why don't you guys take a moment and say a few words?
Well, I'm Yuba. This is Gabe, part of the founding team of Automatic. It's really an honor and humbling to be recognized so soon after announcing our existence. We've been working on this for a fair amount over a year, and to have had such a response so quickly is really very, actually overwhelming. But I think that it shows that we found something, a problem that people really had, that maybe most people weren't even aware that they had, and developed a solution that might actually help people reduce how much they spend on gas, their fuel consumption, how much they pay, and hopefully make them safer and what we like to call smarter drivers. So thank you so much. We'll both be available at the reception to chat. I'd love to chat with you guys as fellow transit nerds. So, thank you again.
All right. Great. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Again, that's very cool. And I want 7 or 30 of them. All right. So with that, we're pretty much wrapped up. David Cummings, where are you, David? Okay, so Xerox is our host for the reception. David Cummings is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director for Parking and Justice Solutions. What are justice solutions? Anyways, and he's just he's gonna take us into our break. David?
Bear with me, I am the guy picking up the tab. So just wanted to clear up one bit of confusion. We are the sponsors, and it has a logo that says Park and a logo that says Xerox. In fact, they're one and the same company. Park is nothing to do with parking. It's the Palo Alto Research Center right down the road. We were purchased by Xerox 3 years ago, and we quickly realized they spent $1 billion a year on R&D, and we wanted to get our fair share. And so we have spent millions and millions of dollars on R&D projects each year for parking. In fact, we have 6 different R&D projects underway. Several of which are run out of the Palo Alto Research Center. These are the guys that invented the Ethernet and the Windows environment and things like that. And the mouse. So this is co-sponsored by Park and Xerox, but we are in fact one and the same company. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the drinks.